You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by Quattro Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, Real Estate Runway listeners, today we have a very interesting show for you. We're going to call this one Earth, Wind, and Fire, I do believe. But honestly, it's not all cream and cookies in the real estate world. Not everything goes according to plan. You have trials and tribulations you have to overcome. And so we're going to kind of go behind the scenes on, one of the very few projects of ours who hasn't exactly turned out according to plan. It always has a happy ending, but there are some very interesting things you can find yourself in the middle of when playing in this space. So we're going to get into what some of those things are, what you can learn from them as investors, as operators, and how you might avoid some of these unknown pitfalls that can come from investing in real estate. So before we get to the show, if you get any value out of the show, please scroll down, leave us that 5-star review and thoughtful comment. Those are worth their weight in gold, and they are the way we grow this show. So we appreciate you for doing that. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Team Quattro Capital, one word, no special characters, or by simply following us at thequattroway.com. We appreciate all of you, and we love to hear from you. Drop us a note at podcast@thequattroway.com. And if you want to be on the show or apply to be on the show, please visit us at thequattroway.com/podcast. And now, on to your scheduled production. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast, Quattro Roundtable Edition. As of this recording, I'm going to say Happy New Year. We may not publish this for a couple of months, so that'll be my little trigger for, when we actually recorded this. But joined today with one of our esteemed Quattro partners and managing partner for asset management, Kim Wendland. Kim, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm awesome. So fun to be here with everybody.
And I see you're wearing your Firewalker shirt. What some of you may know after listening here is Kim and I.
Risk management, asset management, Firewalker, all the same thing.
All the same. Kim and I attended Tony Robbins' UPW, Unleash the Power Within, a few weeks ago with our partners, and we walked on fire. So she is sporting that shirt today. Love it. Very fitting for the episode we're recording today. And with that being said, Kim, I know we wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about one of our particular properties and some of the lessons we've learned on it, some of the challenges we've experienced, and ultimately, kind of what has unfolded on that project to date. So where would you like to start with that as we introduce the project?
Well, I think for me, the message to everyone really is about risk management. Every investment has a measure of risk. That's why we're all rewarded. And how well you handle those risks as they materialize and how many more you can prevent, which is even better, that's the real key. And that's one of the success factors for great asset management. So, a lot of people are going to think when they're listening to the story, why would you ever buy that property? And I think, Chad, we really should start and let them know the facts of the project because anybody in our industry would have loved this property, and we still love it. So before we jump into the risks and how we overcame them, why don't we share with them why it was a good project to begin with?
I think that's really important. And, one level of risk mitigation that Team Quattro goes through is two very nice little words called due diligence, And so first you underwrite a project and you spend a lot of time and effort running rental comps and property sale comps and understanding, what potential does this property have? And I'm here to tell you, we were so excited about this project. It was in a fantastic market of Atlanta, Georgia, right? Which is a high rent growth, high job growth environment, wonderful market to be in. It was an older property, so we knew it would have some infrastructure issues, which we spent a lot of time on during due diligence, and so we knew some of that would be a challenge, but of the good things, the thing was not operating well from an occupancy perspective. It was not operating well from an expense perspective. So we knew it had some operational upside in and of itself. And oh my gosh, at the time when we bought this property, I may be misquoting this number, Kim, but it was somewhere around 10 to 15% of organic rent growth that was being experienced in Atlanta, Georgia. Right. So even if we did nothing but sat on the property and operating, the income potential was fantastic, right?
Yeah, it was.
And so
absolutely, you couldn't beat that market too. Like even now, here we are in the beginning of 2023. We've been through the interest rate increases and the valuation deflation a bit, or devaluation, I guess is a better language. But Greater Atlanta, it's still holding strong. So why are we wanting to talk about this project as an example of risk mitigation? And here's, if I were to sum it up, I would say there were three major things. And we jokingly call this the earth, wind, and fire property, but it really probably would be better phrased earth, water, and fire. It's an incredible journey. But let's start with the idea of risks in your control and risks out of your control. We closed this project in January of 2021. The pandemic was not new news, right? We also knew the eviction moratoriums were due to be coming to a close. The property manager, all of our professionals agreed that the project was ripe for great success. So we kick in. One of the most important parts of the business plan is the need to turn the resident base. It was a gentrifying neighborhood, and we knew we needed to deal with an element of crime, and we needed to improve overall, just, what I mean, in the industry. It's about turning the tenant base. It's not about trying to make people homeless. It's not about trying to change anything about human beings. It's about elevating an investment such that people can have a quality home. And in order to do that, you have to attract quality residents also. So a part of that renovation plan required that turnover. So we mentioned the eviction moratorium. The goal here is not to be political. This isn't about a politics. These things were in the news. We're talking about how they addressed or affected this particular project. Well, knowing we needed to turn folks, we immediately get started with looking at people who had a delinquent balance even before the pandemic started. So these are like balances from 2019. I don't think we can claim pandemic at that point, right? The pandemic started in 2020, and it was really about March before the whole thing happened in such a big way. So we start out by working through the courts, and we receive writs. And a writ is the last step of the eviction process, where you have, as the property manager has the ability to remove the person from the premises along with their stuff. Well, record scratch, two things happen there. One is that Georgia, the state, has very different laws about evictions. You don't just get a writ and put them out. That's not the game there. We knew that up front when we bought it. That was fine. What has to happen is the sheriff's department comes in a few weeks later and removes them and their stuff. Well, because of the eviction moratorium, they were behind 13 months. So over a year. And even though we had a stack of writs going through the courts, we still could not have the people leave so that we could receive the units and get the renovation. We did all kinds of programs. We did cash for keys. We did all kinds of things to try to help people want to leave. But it was very difficult to find a place to live when you have a supply and demand problem like we do now. And still, to this day, have. As a result, being able to evict people became impossible. And in fact, here we are in January of 2023, 2 years into the property, and we still have 4 residents there. We can't make it through the legal system to have them evicted, even though they had 2019 delinquent balances. there is a very real risk when you have major legislation that can change your business plan. So how do you handle that? What do you do? That's the really big question. It isn't what has happened to me. The much bigger question is, what will I do about it? And when I say me or I, that is really improper language, because there's nothing in real estate that happens individually. You're like, what's happened to my property? No, it's what's happened to our property, and what will we as the greater team do about that. So as we dug in and we started working hard on it, we found ways to incent those who could leave, and we had to bake in and re-underwrite for the drag through the courts. We continue to stay totally vigilant and on top of that, but it was a major impact to the property. So here we are fighting the courts. That's like the big piece number one. The second risk that happened there was the weirdest thing, Chad, and I know we dug into this. You might want to tell this part of the story. During due diligence, we found really volatile, strange kind of water bills. Since you're on the acquisition lead, why don't you remind or let everyone know what we were seeing and how we were working to mitigate early on.
Yeah, sure. And just real quickly before we jump to the next mitigation, if we can, add a little value for the listeners on the, writ does not equal eviction situation.
Yeah.
Or rather, set out does not equal it as well. What, in your mind, to help people kind of see this in their diligence and when they're vetting markets, what in your mind, in addition to COVID, actually is driving the massive delay in set outs that we're experiencing?
Yeah, that has to do with that additional step that the state of Georgia has, where it requires that law enforcement organizations do the set out, not the property. Our security team on the property can't do it. There are a couple of counties that function differently, but as a whole, that's how the state works. And so when you're waiting for over a year to be able to enforce something the court said, yeah, this person should give you the apartment back, and you have to wait over a year for that person to leave, that's bad news on any project's financials.
Right. And so in addition, if I'm remembering correctly, I know we've also been fighting a bit of a crime problem at this property that is elevated to a level it was higher since we took over. I think a big problem that's happened there is we've also seen a large reduction in the amount of law enforcement officers in that area. Can you speak to that a little bit and maybe the impact that's having?
Yeah, so that is a totally separate risk I was going to dig into, but yeah, I see your point about how they're related. With regards to things that happen that are out of your control, you probably remember there was a significant amount of riots in the street. There was the whole defund the police language, which sadly, that was like the world's worst tagline in my opinion. I understood the intent and what they were trying to do, and maybe I could have got around that, but got behind that. But the way it was marketed, it was unfortunate. And so police officers who, they want to go home at night and take care of their children as well, were at a significantly higher risk. And so DeKalb County, the city of Decatur and DeKalb County, before COVID, had 2,000 police officers. And this summer, the summer of 22, a mere 18 months later, they had 200. So there was a mass exodus in that city of law enforcement. And then you combined the fact that they're overwhelmed, overloaded, and you just have a lower level of service. You have a lower response time. They're just driving from call to call to call. They're not really able to help prevent bad things from happening. So, being able to turn the residence base was one problem, but then having an escalation of crime in the area at large, like that happened over the entire Atlanta MSA, not just Decatur. But having those two forces together really created a much greater challenge. So we actually spent significant energy working with our security team. We had to really level that up, and the reason isn't because we're like anti-people. Like, I want to make it really clear, we have a responsibility for all of the people on the property, and maintaining order and having law-abiding residents is a basic part of any community, especially an apartment complex. So, and especially during a real trying time. So, you know, we worked really hard to make sure that we were doing everything that we could to help people live a positive way there. But when you don't have the backing of the local government, it sure does make it more difficult.
You know, I think one of the old adages is you can't fight City Hall, you know, and that has been a challenge. It doesn't matter, you know, how good of an operator you are, how strong your teams are, you know, when the local government is not operating in your favor, and also you're not getting the support, you know, to keep law and order under control, in order effectively. It doesn't matter what the economic opportunity on the deal is. You don't have the mechanisms in place to be successful. So anyway, I wanted to touch on that, but pivoting back to where you were taking it with, you know, going to the water section, this was a very unique situation. So one thing we know about Georgia in general, you know, they have a lot of the pre-1975 construction deals where they used galvanized feed plumbing and cast iron drain plumbing. Nowadays, you know, copper or PVC, copper or PEX, would be the feed line, and PVC is typically the drain line. So that's more your modern materials. Well, we spent a tremendous amount of time checking out the plumbing because we knew that in a deal that age, that's usually something that we're going to run into a problem with. So we focused very heavily on the drain lines, the cast iron. We put a lot of scopes and cameras. I have thousands of hours of video, or not hours, gigabytes of video, you know, going through every single nook and cranny, checking for spots we needed to fix. We actually had the seller dig up and fix a few spots for us, which was positive. You know, and so we spent a lot of time on that. You know, we checked out the water meters to make sure that we kind of understood what was going on. We had some interesting breadcrumbs that we probably should have paid a little more attention to, knowing what we know now. But we were seeing a bit of an erratic billing cycle with the property. Now, the interesting thing is it wasn't all high. Some was very low, and then it wouldn't. But they also bill, I think, Kim, every 60 days. Is that right? They bill every 2 months?
Yeah, it's a 2-month increment on their billing cycle.
So you already only have 6 bills a year instead of 12. And not to mention, they were going up and down. Sometimes they would be next to nothing. Well, we did uncover that the seller had received a lot of credits for overbillings and things of that sort. They had fixed a couple of problems they got credits for. So we were able to get comfortable on an overall aggregate usage that the property was doing okay, right? And I think that's really where maybe I turn it back over to you, Kim, is, you know, we buy the property thinking that we know we've got old plumbing, but we're thinking that it's in decent enough shape, and we already had a few things we had pegged to fix, you know, some leaks and some sections that needed to be replaced, and so we itemized those and did that. But let me turn it back over to you, because this is where things really started to spew out of control, to use a little pun there.
That was the weirdest thing. Weird meaning, you know, that the water board, the watershed, they want their payments, right? So here was our billing cycle. I'm not even kidding. The first bill comes in March for the January to February timeframe, and it was $200. Like 200.00. No commas.
For a 110 unit 110 property.
Unit. Yeah, 110 unit property. Like, oh my goodness. So I call them up. Hey, water board, I don't think you billed us enough. And they're like, oh, no. It just takes a little bit of time. You acquired the property in January. We'll get it all corrected on the next bill. And the next bill won't come until after April. Like, so March and April. Next bill comes, golly gee, it was double. It was $400. I call them back up and say, I still don't think this is right. And they're like, oh, no, everything's fine. I said, tell you what, we noticed during due diligence there was a lot of erratic billing. Are you sure your meter is working? Like, can we just do some basic checking of it? And they were like, yeah, sure. So they send the meter guy out. Sure enough, the meter's not working. As soon as they correct the meter, now we're talking, this is June, okay? So January acquisition, in June, 6 months later, the meter changes. And all of a sudden, we're using 3,000 gallons of water a day. So our bill comes in, and it should be somewhere between $6,000 and probably $8,000. If in the summer, it rises. And that's kind of in my head what I'm expecting to see on a monthly basis. You add those together, it should be around, that's like the max for those 2 months. The first bill comes in and it's $21,000. I'm like, oh, they must have back charges. Call them up, try to understand the bill. No back charges. Those are actuals. I have a small, heart attack. Heart's racing, and I'm like asking questions, trying to understand their process, how it works. And sure enough, there was no back billing on there. All of a sudden, we're using that much water. So, of course, the second call is to the property management team, getting our folks to start diagnosing the problem. It just so happened, because this is now June, when that occurs, we're in the middle of our water conservation project. And we literally have just completed replacing every single everything inside all of the units. So thankfully, I know for a fact the issue has to be outside of the units. So we get the plumber to go start looking at ground lines. We work through the process to turn off the water to all the buildings, so you can try to figure out if one of them is the source of the leak. It was super strange. So we find one particular building that did have a problem. The plumber replaced that particular line, and it just so happened that we were using the same plumber that the sellers, the people we bought the property from, had used. And he said, you do know the history on this, right? I said, well, let's assume I don't. What would you share with me? And he said, well, I've replaced several of these lines, and every time we replace one, it creates pressure on another line and they burst. I said, well, this isn't good. What is the solution for that? He goes, well, you really need to replace them all. Well, I didn't really want to do that. We didn't bake in $100,000 to replace all the water lines. That wasn't part of our business plan. But when you're looking at a $30,000 bill, because it is summer, right? You're in the heat of July. The next bill comes in, it was literally $30,000. When you do the math on fixing it or not, the ROI is really clear that in 3 billing cycles you make up for that CapEx. So obviously we repaired the underground water lines. As soon as we did, instantly the bill drops back down. It was $6,000. And between our water conservation and that, we've worked with the watershed as well to be receiving credits on an ongoing basis, in that there was such a problem that they were not supporting. Anyway, we managed to get through that, but it's another example of where, had we not been paying close attention to the utility bills, this could have gone on for months. I hear about operators that do that, and it blows my mind, where they're like, oh, somebody will tell me if there's a problem. I'm like, really? Nobody told me there was a problem. I was looking at the bill. That's how we found a problem. So, this is why we call the project Earth, Water, and Fire. We had to dig up the earth to go replace the water lines to deal with the small flood we had created under the ground without knowing it. So we were really happy. I was thrilled in August. In fact, the team got tired of me sharing the gallon used at the property because it was such an important thing to make sure we had it solved. I bet you were really happy when I stopped reporting the water status there in 4015. Yeah.
Well, as the fellow data nerd, I think I like good news with this data back. So probably not for me, but just to stack onto that, you go back to how could we have caught this in diligence? And this is really a challenging thing for those of you who are investors and operators out there. It's very easy to go spot problems in a drain line. Why is that? The drain line's as big as my head. I can stick a camera down there and go look at it. It's very easy. The feed lines are about that big around to maybe that big around on the mains. And so you can't just stick a camera down there and figure it out. You literally, especially on an older property, you only have the data. You have the usage. Now, sometimes you can look at the sewer usage as well to figure out, is all the water being used going into the sewer, because that kind of helps when those don't tie out. That's a smoking gun. But I guess what I would say is caution to he or she who accepts erratic bills, and thinks they can explain it away, because peril is probably coming your way when the true cause of those erratic bills shows its head. And so and plumbing is expensive. Plumbing is not something that you can go and inject money into and see an increase to your rent unless, it's creating a problem for residents by not having it. But that's kind of a basic necessity, And so it unfortunately is something that we had to do. Otherwise it was going to plague the property forever. And it comes at the expense of, capital that was allocated for other revenue generating things. So that's kind of my little
absolutely. But Chad, to your point, when it comes to underground water pipes, and by the way, they're on every single property everywhere across the nation, right? We've since changed, and we were already one of the more conservative underwriters out there, but we further changed our process so that given an age of the building, we stack on additional capex for the unknown unknowns. Like really, that's all you can do is make sure that you're truly liquid in all phases of crisis. If you get through that first year or two and you know that you're golden, great. The investors get a return of their capital back sooner. But the issue of not having it up front can be really strong. But Chad, I know we're running tight on time, and I want to jump into the third part of Earth, Wind, and Fire here. Earth, Water, and Fire. The fire that happened. So we had right up front near the entrance to the property in August. So we're still in the first year. Still in the first year of the property. We finally solved the water problem. Now we have fire. Thankfully, no one was hurt. You always care about the people first. You're always looking for safety first, making sure everyone who was displaced was rehoused. Because of all the smoke damage, it was literally not inhabitable. And it just so also happened to include our laundry room, which is a real hassle for the residents. So that fire was a really major unexpected issue. Fires do happen. Everybody works really hard to avoid them. When we went through all of the inspections and all of the analysis, we were found to not be a cause. There was a incident with crime, right? Back to the crime issue. A couple was having a fight. He goes to work. She comes back, throws a Molotov cocktail in the window and drives off. You can't really mitigate that risk, right? At this point, you're super grateful that you did a good job of buying proper coverage. But more important than the insurance coverage is, at this point, you can't prevent or eliminate that risk. You have to mitigate the impact of that risk. And having insurance is part of the game, but there's a negotiation that occurs that a lot of people who haven't been through that aren't aware of. And that negotiation is, well, what will be the amount of the proceeds from insurance? And what you have to think about is that the insurance company has massive piles of data. They also have a large fleet of adjusters who are fully educated and understand what it takes to rebuild something. So if you think as an investment team that on your own you can fight that battle and win, that really is some hubris. Knowing that you're outgunned is really important. And so we immediately hired a IGG It's a weird GGGIA. It's the three names independent adjuster. So GGGIA. Highly recommend them. They are an independent organization. That's what a public adjuster is. And they're basically, kind of think about attorney to attorney. This is like insurance to insurance. And they have the ability, with all of the data and all of the analytics and all of the history and context and network, be able to counter propose the proceeds. So the first step is that the insurance company agrees or don't that there's a claim. So they agreed that there was a claim. We hired an independent adjuster. The insurance company put forward $402,000 to rebuild the building, which our independent adjuster said, that's okay, don't panic, it's just the starting point. And by the time we finish, that number had become $785,000. Now you have to pull your deductible and stuff out of that, but at the end of the day, that was $685,000 versus some number less than $400,000 that would have come had we not had an independent adjuster. So that is another example of where it's hugely important. If you have rental property, be sure to have the loss of lease provision. You want that rider, and you want to make sure you have really strong fire coverage. But get to know some independent adjusters that when you need them, and it won't be a fun time to deal without them.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Kim. And I think to add on to this, since we have experienced that, we now have a member of our team, a group called iStorm, which you can actually go and go to istorm.com and check out their website. But they're a team we've partnered with who, this is quite literally what they do is they will go to your property, create a physical baseline document of what that property is and all its finishes and qualities and statuses and any existing damage, so that you have a document that says, hey, okay, if you own enough property, you will have some damage or insurance claim or something, hopefully not a Molotov cocktail induced fire, but here we are. And it's very easy when you call up your team, they are also the adjusters, and say, okay, well, let's go pull the baseline, let's go prove to the insurance company how the property was, and now let's go start the negotiation on how to, put it back together. It puts you in a much better spot when you preemptively mitigate your risk. And actually, if you scroll back in the episodes, it is not published as of yet when we're recording this, but by the time this one records, it will be published. Scroll back and look for Mark Deddens with iStorm Group. And we did a podcast with that group talking about what they do and how they do it and how they partner with us. So, we've since augmented as Quattro our risk mitigation in the insurance department. And I highly recommend all of you who are operators push on that as well. So,
yeah. So Chad, I know we're about to land the plane here. We're coming in for a landing, but these are just, stories from the trenches that hopefully will help people have a better sense of what to do. But there's some principles that come along here that in terms of risk are really important. And I just want to share three of the most important ones. Number one, risk is going to happen. In fact, I have a little button here. I don't know if you can read it easily. Maybe there we go. Is it reverse? Darn, it is.
But nope, it's straight my way. You're good.
Oh, good. Okay, good. It says risk management.
Manage risk or clean the fan.
Manage risk or clean out the fan. Manage risk or clean out the fan. And I think that having that proactive approach, not only with due diligence, but think about your contingency plans, financial contingency, especially as it relates to a given project as well as the era that you're in. Secondly, not all risks are in your control, but all of them will have an impact. In your mind, when you're dealing with the risk, you're not just thinking about what has just happened. You're thinking about how can I make it go away, eliminate it? How can I prevent it in the future? And how can I minimize the impact if I can't do one of the other two? And then finally, the absolute most important word in risk management is proactive. Be proactive. Do not want to be reactive And if you have to be reactive, insure the heck out of it. That's the way to go. So those are the big 3 principles about risk management. But remember this, manage risk or clean out the fan.
I love that mic drop moment there. And, as of this current recording, we are in the process of selling this asset. We hope to report a good story on that when we're complete with that project. So just a few stories from the trenches for all of you. Not everything is rainbows and unicorns all the time in this business. It's fun to get to share that so that everyone gets to see that. And yeah, just keep your eyes on the horizon, folks. Sometimes you have to deal with the stuff in the trenches, but if you can hold on, the long term is typically going to be positive in the world of real estate. So with that being said, Kim, I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your knowledge, your brain today. Hope to have you back on soon.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Hey, everybody out there, remember, these are the reasons why it's fun to be on a limited partner instead of an active partner.
Yes, very good.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. All right, everyone. That was an action-packed episode filled with some trials and tribulations and some real nuggets you can take back to your business or back to your investing experience on things to watch out for, things maybe you don't want to encounter, or if you are brave enough to encounter these things, there's always a way through them. You have to know how to solve it. Hope you gave you some of that value. If you got any value out of the show today, please leave us a 5-star review and a thoughtful comment. Those ratings really are worth their weight in gold, and they're the only way to increase the reach of the show. Thank you for all those responses we've had so far on this ask. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Team Quattro Capital, one word, no special characters, or by simply visiting us at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this has been the Real Estate Runway Podcast.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway Podcast.